This is continuation and part 4 of our discussion on the basic principles of taxation. Taxes. Taxes are enforced contribution levied on persons and property by the lawmaking body of the state by virtue of its sovereignty in order to support the government and all public needs. Taxes are enforced contribution that even if we as taxpayer, we are quite hesitant in parting our hard-earned income, we have our obligation to the government. It is an enforced contribution. Buwis. Generally payable in money. Generally payable in money. Can the taxpayer offer to the government or tender to the government that he does not have cash or money, therefore he will simply tender his laptop as or in payment for his assessed tax? Answer is no. Because tax is generally payable in money. Ma'am, why is it that there are instances that the government forfeits? The government forfeits either personal or real property of the taxpayer. This taking away of the personal or real property or properties of the taxpayer is in furtherance of the remedies available to the government in case of the taxpayer fails to pay his taxes. Remedies available to the government, either in the process we call as distraint or levy. But if you are the taxpayer, taxes are generally payable in money. Taxes are proportionate in character because this is based on ability to pay. Later, we will discuss direct and indirect tax, the application of progressive system of taxation vis-a-vis the regressive system of taxation, and we will apply the ability to pay theory or equality. Taxes are levied on persons, property, or exercise of right or privilege, depending on the nature and the kind of tax levied by the state which has jurisdiction over the subject or object of taxation. Then we will be discussing also the situs or place of taxation that you need to memorize. Because it is a requirement that the taxing authority must have jurisdiction over the subject or object of taxation that is levied by the lawmaking body of the state and must be levied for public purpose, which involves social welfare and health projects of the government, construction of roads, bridges, assistance to the victims of calamities, to the victims or patients of COVID-19, and etc. That it must be levied for public purpose. Classification of taxes. As to subject matter, taxes may either be personal, poll or capitation tax, property tax, or excise or privilege tax. Personal poll or capitation tax is imposed on persons residing within a specified territory without regard to their property or occupation. An example for this, and as I mentioned in our previous lecture, poll, capitation, previously cedula, The classical example for this is the community tax. That when you pay the community tax, you will be issued community tax certificate as proof of payment. Yeah? Property tax is a tax on property, whether real or personal. An example for this is the real property tax. Yung amilyar. For lands, buildings, improvements, we are paying our real property tax. Whoever is the tax declarant. Pag sinabi natin tax declarant, not necessarily the owner of the property. That is misnomer. But generally, and usually, the tax declarant is the owner of the property. But there are cases that the owner is not, the registered owner is not the same as the tax declarant. Familiar po yan. Real estate tax, and that is a local tax. Excise or privilege tax is imposed upon the performance of an act, enjoyment of privilege, or engaging in an occupation. Example, income tax. When you derive income, you are given the privilege by the government to earn the said income. Income tax is excise or privilege tax. Let us not confuse the word excise here as excise taxes on non-essential goods such as liquor, cigarettes. No, let us not confuse ourselves. This is excise or privilege tax as a classification or kind of taxes with reference to subject matter. Another example is estate tax, donor's tax. These are excise or privilege taxes. Classification of taxes as to who bears the burden may either be direct tax or indirect tax. Let us illustrate. Assuming that we have Mr. Negosyante. He is engaged in selling of face masks, PPEs, and medical supplies. In this time of pandemic, Mr. Negosyante is the only one who is happy because he is deriving more income. The only one. Now, in deriving his income, he will be subject to income tax. And Mr. Negosyante is our taxpayer. Now, the incidence of taxation falls on Mr. Negosyante being the taxpayer. Now, who shoulders the burden of the tax? Who shoulder the burden of the income tax? It is likewise being shouldered by Mr. Negosyante. The taxpayer also shoulders the burden of his tax. The incidence of taxation and the burden of taxation falls on the same. And that is our subject, the taxpayer. Income tax is a direct tax. The incidence and burden falls on the taxpayer. Now, Mr. Negosyante in the course of his business is also liable to the payment of value-added tax. Value-added tax is a business tax. Income tax is different as to nature, purpose, from that of value-added tax. However, the nature of on and characteristic of value-added tax is that it can be shifted to the customers, to the buyers. That ultimately it is the end user who shoulders the payment or the burden of the tax. Mr. Negosyante can shift the burden of paying the value-added tax to mamimili. And that makes value-added tax an indirect tax. If the burden of the tax can be shifted to customers, buyers, or clients, whether it be sale of goods, properties, or services, etc., then the tax is an indirect tax. Now, just remember the distinction. If the burden of the tax can be shifted can be passed on to the customer, client, then that would be indirect tax. If the burden is shouldered by the taxpayer itself, himself, herself, then that will be a direct tax. Now, we have this constitutional limitation that we mentioned in our previous lecture, that the state shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. What is meant by progressive system of taxation? We should not confuse that with progressive tax rates. Progressive system of taxation implies that in our tax system, we should have more direct rather than indirect taxes. And that is the reason why business taxes, value-added tax, time and again, has been the subject of oppositions. They are questioning the validity or legality of the value-added tax being an indirect tax. Abacadaburo Party List versus Secretary of Finance. What is the ruling of the Supreme Court? The VAT law, is valid. Valid. Because if you will try to look at the Philippine setting as to our tax system, we have more direct taxes compared to that of indirect taxes. Ang kaso nga lang, for indirect taxes, madaling i-audit kasi based siya sa gross. Compared to, say, income tax, based on the net, based on the taxable income. There are benefits, on the part of the government, there are benefits of indirect taxes. Another point. Ma'am, you said in the previous lecture that in the Philippines, we do not have regressive tax rates. But if you will try to look at commentaries, indirect taxes, business taxes, excise tax on tobacco, cigars, or liquors are somewhat regressive. Ma'am, you are wrong in saying otherwise. Now, we have, as to tax rates, as I told you, taxes may either be progressive, proportional, or regressive. As to tax rates, we do not have, as the tax base increases, the tax rate decreases. That is as to tax rates. But as to implication or effect to the taxpayer, it may happen that we have some sort of regressive, and that is somewhat contradictory to the progressive system of taxation. And that is regressive system. Now, say that we have a minimum wage earner, no? And then he is purchasing goods like Jollibee, subject to value-added tax. Why am I paying value-added tax? It should be Jollibee paying. The burden should be on Jollibee. Dahil mayaman ng Jollibee. No? But value-added tax is an indirect tax. No? The burden can be shifted to the buyer, purchaser, or customer. That is why they are contesting the validity of the law. But it is valid. Indirect taxes are valid. But as I told you, in our system, we have more direct rather than indirect taxes. And we are complying with the progressive system of taxation. Again, the effect of indirect taxes is somewhat regressive. But we do not have regressive tax rates in the Philippines. Regressive system, perhaps. Or you take note of the direct and indirect taxes. Other classification of taxes. As to determination of amount, taxes may either be specific or ad valorem. A specific tax is fixed amount by head, number, or some standard of weight or measurement. It is based on standard of measurement. Example for specific tax is excise tax on distilled spirits, wines, or liquors. And some of our customs duties are based on weight or unit of measurement. Ad valorem. Now, this is based on the value of the subject matter assessed. Based on the value of the subject matter. Income tax, based on the amount of the income you earn. That is ad valorem. Real property tax, based on the value of the property. That is also ad valorem. Estate, donors, value-added tax, these are ad valorem tax. As to purpose, a tax may either be general, fiscal, or revenue, or special or regulatory. This is the secondary purpose of taxation. As the term itself suggests, general, fiscal, or revenue tax is imposed to raise revenue for the general purposes of the government. Income tax, value-added tax, estate, donors, excise taxes, normally, fiscal or revenue tax. Special or regulatory, this is a tax imposed for special purposes. Say, customs duties. Value-added tax on importation. Yan, to regulate. That may be special or regulatory tax. As to imposing authority, the tax may either be national tax or municipal or local tax. If it is imposed by the national government, then therefore that is national tax. Our national internal revenue taxes, as well as the customs duties, these are imposed by the national level or the national government, and therefore national taxes. Now, if it is imposed by the local government unit, then that is municipal or local tax. Say occupation tax, sun and gravel tax, some of the amusement taxes or business taxes, local. And then we have professional tax, real property tax. These are municipal or local taxes. As to graduation or rate, taxes may either be proportional, progressive, or regressive. And this we already mentioned in our previous lecture. Proportional, based on fixed percentage of property, receipts, or other basis to be taxed. Value-added tax, 12% rate. That is proportional. Income tax, particularly corporate income tax, that is proportional. Some of the final withholding taxes are proportional. Basta fixed or constant yung rate. Still consistent with the progressive system of taxation, ability to pay. Because if you have more, proportionally, your tax will also be higher. Diba? Now, progressive, the rate increases as the tax base increases. Individual income tax, that is progressive. Okay, regressive, the rate decreases as the tax base increases. Okay, let us distinguish tax from other terms. Toll, license, and debt. Tax from that of toll. A tax is a demand of sovereignty, while a toll is a demand of proprietorship. A tax is based on necessity, while a toll is based on cost of construction or maintenance of public improvement paid for the use of another's property. A tax is imposed only by the government for its support, while a toll is imposed by the government, private individuals, or entities. Now, I'll give you a simple example. For toll, this can be imposed by both government and private. The Espana is flooded. Oh, you miss Espana, ma'am? Yes, I miss Espana. I miss the students. Although the students do not miss me. Now, the Espana is flooded. And now here comes this man who provided a wooden stool. A wooden stool. A wooden plywood. So that those who are passing can use his wooden plywood. And he is asking for payment. 5 pesos for those who will be using my wooden plywood. Is that a tax? No, that is a toll. That is demand of proprietorship based on the cost of construction for the use of another's property. And it can be imposed or be collected by private individuals or entities. Let us make things more complicated. Toll fees. I would like to go to the province, and I will be passing NLEX, ECTEX. I will be paying a toll fee. And in that toll fee, there is this 12% VAT. Aba, that is a tax on tax. Meron ng toll fee, meron pang VAT, which is a tax. Is the collection of the toll fee and the collection of the value-added tax valid? This is the issue in the case of Renato Diaz versus Aurora Maria Timbol versus Renato Diaz and Aurora Maria Timbol versus Secretary of Finance and Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Now, we should distinguish a tax from a toll. Now, the toll fee can be subject to value-added tax because that is covered by Section 108 of the National Internal Revenue Code of providing service, sale of service. Therefore, the collection of toll fee and the value-added tax, talaga yung value-added tax, is, or are both valid. Tax to be distinguished from license. Tax is levied for revenue, the exercise of taxing power unlimited as to amount, and the failure to pay does not make the act or business illegal. That means if you will not pay your taxes, your business is still, or will not make your business illegal. But in the process, if there would be violations of the tax code, that would result into a criminal sanction, it may happen that you will be subject to criminal liability. And the tax evasion, subject to criminal liability. But again, I would like to stress that tax laws are not criminal, neither penal. Taxes or tax laws are mere civil. Now, license involves exercise of police power imposed for regulation, which amount is limited to expenses of regulation. Failure to pay makes the act or business illegal. If you do not have your permit, wala kang mayor's permit, business permit, your business is illegal. Okay. Tax to be distinguished from debt. A tax is based on law, while a debt is based on contract. Tax is generally payable in money, and this cannot be subject of assignment. Assignment of rights as a general rule is allowed in our obligations and contracts. But that cannot be done in case of taxes. A debt may be paid in money or in kind and can be subject of assignment. It can be paid in money or in kind, and that is why we have dasyon and pago. If you can still remember your obligations and contracts. We have dasyon and pago, adjudicasyon and pago, but that is not possible even if you will offer it to the government. You should pay money, generally payable in money. Tax imprisonment is a sanction for non-payment except for poll tax. It is a sanction for non-payment. For tax evasion, if there would be presumption of fraud, it may be a sanction for non-payment in case of tax. But there is no imprisonment for non-payment of debt. That is a constitutional provision. Now, remember also that taxes cannot be subject of set-off or compensation, while debt can be subject of set-off or compensation, since compensation is one of the modes of extinguishment of obligation. That is our rule. That is the present rule. However, notably, there is this case of Garlitos versus Domingo. That was an old case wherein it involves estate tax. And the court handling the estate allowed set-off or compensation. Since the obligation of the government and the taxpayer is both due and demandable and finally liquidated. But our rule, and in the questions and problems, tax cannot be subject of compensation or set-off. Sample questions. An example of a property tax is letter A, additional community tax on income of real properties. Letter B, real estate tax on real properties. So this is property tax. Letter C, estate tax on inherited properties. And then donor's tax on donation of property. Letter A, that is personal polar capitation tax. Letter B, that is property tax. C and D, that is excise or privilege tax. Our answer is letter B. Next, Benny just passed the bar exams. Before he can lawfully practice his occupation, he should pay, letter A, professional tax. Letter B, percentage tax, income tax, and value-added tax. He's not yet practicing his occupation and he's not yet deriving any income yet. Therefore, not subject to income tax. How about business tax? Not yet. Now, what is our answer? Letter A, professional tax. Professional tax is a local tax. Other questions. A tax on business collected by the BIR. Letter A, direct tax. Letter B, indirect tax. C, property tax. And D, local tax. Tax on business is indirect tax. See, value-added tax is indirect tax. Property tax, no. Excise or privilege. Local, no. National. Our answer is letter B, indirect tax. Mang Tolites has a property held for lease and he is paying income tax on its rental income. The tax he is paying is based on the amount of rental income. How do we classify the tax? If it is based on the value of the subject or object of taxation, then that is letter A, indirect, no. Income tax is direct tax. Local, no. That is national tax. Letter C, property tax, no. It is excise or privilege tax. And letter D, ad valorem tax. Our answer is ad valorem. Letter D, ad valorem tax, because it is based on the value of the income earned, the value of the subject or object of taxation.
Roof off, we're gonna tear the roof off the mother sucker. Tear the roof off the sucker. Tear the roof off, we're gonna tear the roof off the mother sucker. Tear the roof off the sucker. Tear the roof off, we're gonna tear the roof off the mother sucker. Tear the roof off the sucker. Tear the roof off, we're gonna tear the